Now if the earth was flat and people lived on top of the earth, on one surface, on one side only, then what would have happened is when the sun appeared, there would have been a sudden appearance of the day and night, because the entire earth would have been illuminated. It's flat. There wouldn't have been a gradual process of day and night, night being merged into day and day being merged into night, as Allah says. It would have been a sudden transition from day to night. That's how Allah would have described it. But because the earth is not flat and is spherical, there is a gradual process. Second thing, the second conclusion that we can learn from this verse. Allah describes the day and night to be found racing side by side, with neither the night outstripping or outpacing the day, or the day outpacing the night. The reference for this is Surah 36 verse 40, where Allah says, neither the night outstrips the day. This again points to the fact that the earth cannot be flat. Because if it was flat, then day and night cannot coexist together, because that is what the Quranic verse implies, that they are both in a state of coexistence, neither one outstripping the other. So if it was flat, it would not have been possible. Again, in Surah 37 verse 6, Allah says, Lord of the heavens and of the earth, and all that is between them, and Lord of the sun's risings. Now here Allah talks about the sun's risings. The plural is used, implying multiple periods of risings. So there are multiple places and times that the sun rises. This can only happen when the earth is spherical and is rotating. So we're getting multiple risings. We're getting a rising at this place, and the next point that comes into the focus of the sun, then that also appears as sun rising. But if it was flat, obviously sunrise will be instantaneous throughout the entire earth. So this implies also that the earth is not stationary, because through its rotation, as each part of the earth comes into focus with the sun, we're getting sunshine and we're getting the sunrise. And also it implies that the earth is a sphere. Now these conclusions can only be deduced now that we have the knowledge that the earth is spherical. But it was mentioned by the Quran at that time. Furthermore, in Surah 31 verse 29, Allah says, Hast thou not seen how Allah merges the night into the day, and merges the day into the night? Again in Surah 39 verse 5, Allah says, He coils the night upon the day, and coils the day upon the night. Now this is also a very beautiful description, the way Allah describes the merging and the coiling. It gives a very vivid description of how day and night occurs. Here Allah describes it as a process of interpenetration and of a process of winding. The word used is coil. So this implies that the earth is in a state of rotation, and it can rotate if it's a sphere. Now if you visualize the earth, the side that is facing the sun is day, and the side away from the sun would be night. Now as the earth rotates on its axis every 24 hours, we get the process of the alternation of day and night. Now let's try and imagine this. Exactly the point where the day ends and the night starts, it is a very gradual process when day ends and night starts. Now those travelers who have traveled across time zones will be able to appreciate this merging of day and night as you enter into the various time zones. And they would be able to understand this concept of merging better. So we can see that these Quranic verses talk about the fact, they point to two important conclusions. The first being that the earth is spherical. That is how you can get multiple sunrises, and that is how you can get the concept of the day and night merging. And the second conclusion that we can derive from the fact that the earth is not flat, it is actually spherical. Therefore, we get a gradual process of day and night and not instantaneous.
Just to add to that, I would like to refer to another verse which also gives a strong indication that actually the night and day is due to the movement of the earth and not actually to the movement of the sun, which was believed at the time. In Surah 91 verses 1 to 4, Allah says, By the sun and its rising brightness, and the moon when she followeth him, and the day when it revealeth him, and the night when it enshrouded him. I think it's very significant that the Quran uses this word, that the day reveals the sun, and not the other way around, which means to say that it's actually the movement of the earth which brings the sun into focus, rather than the sun bringing the earth into focus. Well, this gives a very strong indication that it's actually not the sun that is moving, but the earth. But perhaps a more vivid description is given to us in Surah 27 verse 88, where we are told, "And you see the mountains and think that they are firmly fixed, but they pass unnoticed as the clouds do. This is the work of Allah, who has perfected all things, and He is well acquainted with all what you do." Now this is very important, because we find that what Allah says here is that the clouds, the mountains, when you look at them, we think that they are stationary, but they're actually not stationary. They are moving, just as the clouds move. Now let us analyze this imagery as to how do the clouds move. Now we know that the clouds don't move on their own. They are pushed by the wind, so they don't move on their own. Now in like manner, it means the mountains are not moving on their own. They're also being pushed. And this only means that the mountains are being pushed because of the rotation of the earth. So as the earth rotates, so too do the mountains. So this very beautifully illustrates, by imagery, that the earth is definitely moving as the mountains are moving. And we may compare it to the word that was used with reference to the celestial bodies, sabaha, which is a different form of movement. There the movement is self-propelled. And here we see the word is not used specifically because the mountains do not move on their own. And it's very beautiful how the Quran chooses this work with such perfection. So we come to know that obviously that this movement of the earth was unknown at the time of the revelation of the Quran, and therefore obviously this knowledge was not known at the time, which again proves the divine origin of the Quran.
Another very simple thing which illustrates that the earth was moving, is moving actually, is found in the very concept of shadows. The people at that time of revelation, they believed that shadows was formed by movement of the sun from east to west. So on that basis, they devised what we know historically we thought of the sundial. So they thought that the sun moved in that direction, east to west. That's what gave the origin of the shadows. Now, as we've later realized, that it was an inaccurate description. But Allah says in the Quran, in Surah 16, verse 81, He talks about the concept of shadows, not as an indication of movement of the sun, because that was a belief at that time, but merely talks about the function of the sun as an indicator of shadows. Now Allah says in the Quran, in Surah 16, verse 81, "Out of the things He created, Allah has given you shade." Again in Surah 16, verse 48, we are told, "Have the unbelievers not observed that for all the things Allah created, how their shadow shifts right and left, prostrating themselves to Allah while they are full of humility?" So here we are not told anything about the way the shadow is created, but merely the role of the sun as being as being responsible for the shadow. Now the next verse is very important. Allah says in Surah 25, verse 45, "Hast thou not seen how thy Lord has spread the shadow? If He wills, He could have made it stationary. Moreover, we made the sun its guide, and we would draw it towards us easily." So here Allah says in the Quran that had He wanted to, He could have made the shadow stationary. Now what is Allah saying by that? What He is saying, the implications of making the shadow stationary would mean stopping the rotation of the earth, because we know that the earth rotates, and that is what causes the movement or the shadow over a 24-hour period or over a 24-hour period. So if Allah were to make the shadow stationary, then Allah would have ceased the rotation of the earth. Now what would that have implied for our life on this earth? If the earth did not rotate, then what we would have had is one half of the earth would have been in a state of continuous 24-hour sunlight, and the other half of the earth that is not facing the sun would have been in a state of 24 hours of darkness. Now what is the implications for life on this earth? We know that life cannot function normally if there is continuous sunlight or continuous darkness. Many species of plant life would have ceased to exist, and life would not have been possible. Even Allah says in the Quran that He has created night as a rest for man. It is a blessing for man. It is provided as a blessing, and therefore we can find that the rotation of the earth is actually a blessing for man, because it has provided the alternation of night and day, and that brings about an opportunity for man to rest during the night.
I think another point which we haven't mentioned is that we find that as the earth is rotating around the sun, And because the earth is maintained at a particular axis, the very important thing is this results in the various seasons. I think there's something that we also realize, the practical implication of this motion. And it's because of the movement of the earth around the sun that gives us the seasons and the alternation between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere because of the axis of the earth's position.
That is a very important point as well. We now will move on to the next aspect, and that is the concept of the conquest of space. From the verses in the Quran, we can come to the conclusion that Allah has predicted that man would one day achieve the ability to conquer space. The verse that I'm referring to is Surah 55, verse 33, where Allah says, O assembly of men and jinns, if you can penetrate regions of the heaven and the earth, then penetrate them. You will not penetrate them save with a power or authority. This verse implies that man will one day develop the technology and ability to conquer deep regions of space. So hence this verse alludes to the evidence of space exploration. So we can come to that conclusion because Allah says, you will only be able to penetrate it save with a power.
There's another interesting verse in Surah 15, verse 14 and 15, where Allah says, even if you opened unto them a gate to heaven, and they were to continue ascending therein, they would say, our sight is confused as in drunkenness. Nay, we are people bewitched. Now this is very interesting because it describes the effect that this would have if the people could go out into space. And it's described as drunkenness and the people bewitched. And it is very significant that the astronauts have described very similar feeling when they are out in space. Because the whole feeling of weightlessness in outer space is a feeling of uneasiness, it's a feeling of strangeness, as if drunkenness. You know, a person loses orientation. He's in a state of confusion because you are not used to feel no weight and to be floating. And also that the whole appearance from outer space is completely different from what one sees from the earth. And of course, the sight that one sees, because we don't see the reflection of light from the earth appears as a halo, and the whole sky is dark, and the other stars look completely different, and we would think that we are bewitched. So this Quranic verse very beautifully describes the sensation and the feelings one would have if one was truly in space. And how could this have been known by any human at the time? Which again points to the divine revelation of the Quran.
That is a very interesting point, because that is what the astronauts and scientists, that is exactly how they describe their sensation, and that's exactly how the Quran correlates it. So we can, as you've mentioned, it is quite a very valid point. Now we need to go on to the final aspect of this program, and that is the concept of life in other worlds. Is there life in other worlds? And if there is there any evidence in the Quran to suggest that? And is there any evidence in science that points to that possibility? We discussed in the previous programs that Allah talks about the plurality of the heavens and the earth. Here the concept of multiple heavens and worlds was brought home to us. The reference I give you is in the very first surah of the Quran, in Surah 1 verse 1 and 2, where Allah says, all praise be to Allah, the sustainer, nourisher of the worlds. Now this has been referred to many times in the Quran. Let me use another verse which is more specific in Surah 65 verse 12, where Allah says, Allah it is who has created 7 heavens, and of the earth the like thereof. So as I've mentioned before, the concept of 7 is not a literal concept. We use it merely to, we interpret it to imply the concept of multiplicity, that there are multiple heavens and multiple worlds. Now we've established from the Quran, firstly, the fact that there are multiple heavens and there are multiple worlds. The second thing, does Allah allude to the fact that there may be life on other worlds beyond that on our own? A verse in the Quran gives indication that there is life on other planets or in other worlds. And that is found in Surah 42 verse 29, and I quote, among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the living creatures he has dispersed therein, and he is able to gather them together when he wills.
I think a very interesting point there is that the word that is translated as living creatures, people may say, well, the Quran refers to life on other heavens and earth, but maybe it refers to plant life or anything of the sort. But here in this Quranic ayah, it is very explicit. The word used there is dabba. Now, dabba in Arabic means animal life or any creature that moves. So this specifically mentions animal life. So there we are given a very clear indication that there is definitely animal life present in the heavens and the earth. And not only that there is present there, but Allah says that He will gather them together when He wills. So implying that they will be brought together and that they will meet and communicate with each other. So their presence is very clearly indicated by this Quranic ayah, and therefore it implies that we are living beings, and these living beings are not just plants but animal life present in the universe out there. What they are, how they are, we do not know.
There are two actually very interesting verses which I just like to quote now, which also very clearly alludes to the fact that there are living creatures in the heavens and the earth. The verse in Surah 55 verse 29, where Allah says, "Of Him seeks its needs, each one in the heavens and the earth. Every day He appears in new splendor." So Allah is saying everything in the heavens and the earth is seeking its sustenance from Him. Secondly, in Surah 20 verse 6, where Allah says, "Unto Him belongs whatsoever is in the heavens and whatsoever is on earth, whatsoever is in between them and whatsoever is beneath the soil." So here Allah is saying all life belongs to Allah, be it in the heavenly bodies, be it life on earth, be it in the space between the heavens and earth, and between under the depths of the earth.
Right, so it's interesting then. From the Quranic ayah, it implies life in all these points. Let us see from science what they have to say. Now, according to science, they have worked out that as far as our solar system is concerned, that is the sun with all our planets, there is no evidence that life exists on these planets. So far they have confirmed. And some of it, of course, they have been. And, for example, they've landed on the moon, they've got visuals from Mars and so on, so which has been confirmed that there is no life present on these planets.
I think because of the limitations of man's technology, he can only determine in our solar system. And if we look in our solar system, it is only life possible on Earth because of the ideal and exact positioning of the Earth. Any other position, if our planet was second in line or fourth in line, then life would have not been possible. So because of our knowledge, we cannot rule out the possibility of life on other worlds.
As regards the other galaxies, it is found that when scientists analyze our Milky Way, which is within some sort of reach, they find that of the 200 billion stars, at least half of them show a very similar pattern of motion as compared to our sun. And this seems to suggest that these stars have planets or planetary systems rotating around them. So this would suggest the possibility of Earths or similar planets like our Earth existing around those stars. But because of the phenomenal distances, it is not possible for them to actually get more information except by inference. But what they do believe is that there is a 90% chance of not only there being an Earth like ours, but there being life present in many, 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 many planets in this universe. So there is no doubt about that according to science, and they have seemed to have evidence for that. As regards the interstellar space, recent scientific views are that space is seeded with microorganisms in the form of spores, and these spores are present in between the stars. And some are of the opinion as well that such viruses as the influenza virus and so on may be reaching the Earth from this interstellar space. So there's definitely some evidence that there is some sort of life there in the interstellar space. So of course, those living in the heavenly bodies, they say there's a 90% probability of their life being present there. The Earth, of course, we know. The spaces between the heavenly bodies, as we said, they have evidence now there is something going on there for sure. And of course, in the depths of the Earth, even if it implies the type of life that we know that lives beneath the surface of the Earth, there is definitely life beneath the surface of the Earth. And of course, we only know as far as the crust. We haven't gone deeper into the Earth to see what other forms of
Yes.
life may be present there as well.
You know, if you look at the we mentioned in our first or second episode, when we conceptualize the actual universe, the actual vastness of this universe, and the tremendous number of stars and planets, logically there has to be a purpose for them. They cannot just be existing there without any life. There has to be other life forms. I mean, that is a logical conclusion, because there are millions and millions of stars. There has to be some kind of life there. And Allah, as we've described, alludes to the fact that there is life on these other planets.
Absolutely. I think that's all we have time for today. We want to thank you for joining us. And from me, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
And from myself, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.